Prayer was in the news again this month following the terrible mass shooting at a Catholic school in Minneapolis. As has happened before in the United States, politicians spoke about offering, quote, thoughts and prayers for the victims and their families. It sparked a backlash, though, from some who said that was not enough. Action leading to gun reform was needed more than thoughts and prayers. Here in Manitoba, Larry Barker, chief of Hollowwater First Nation, also gave attention to prayer when he said he was praying for those injured by the stabbings in that community. He asked others to join him in those prayers. The idea of calling for prayer following tragedy got us thinking about the whole matter of public calls for prayer. In a very secular nation like Canada, what's the role of prayer and what do Canadians think about it? John Longhurst, our faith contributor, is here to delve into some of those questions. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what is the state of prayer in Canada today?
Well, according to a survey by Angus Reid in 2022, 36% of Canadians said they prayed at least once a month to God or a higher power. This was down from 44% in 2016. The survey also found that women are more likely than men to pray, as are people age 55 and older. Among the religiously committed, not surprisingly, that figure rises to 86% who said they prayed at least once a month. And when asked why they prayed, the top reasons given by Canadians are to ask for help or to thank God for help, which reminds me of what author Anne Lamott quipped about the only two prayers that truly exist are, as she put it, help me, help me, help me, and thank you, thank you, thank you. As for the benefits of prayers, many Canadians, even those not formally religious, said it was a way to find peace and cope with stress, and for some it was an act of mindfulness or meditation.
So what about prayer in the political arena, John?
Calls for prayers by politicians here in Canada are not as common as in the United States, but it has happened. When he was Prime Minister, Stephen Harper spoke about thoughts and prayers, including after the attack on the Ottawa War Memorial in 2014 and after various acts of terrorism in the Middle East. And Justin Trudeau offered thoughts and prayers for the people of France after the Paris attacks in 2015 and again after the stabbings in Saskatchewan in 2022. But there are nowhere as many mentions of thoughts and prayers in Canada as there are in the United States. One study in that country found that between 1995 and 2017, there were 4,139 instances in which a congressperson expressed thoughts and prayers in the Senate or House. In Canada, a search of Hansard during that same time period found that thoughts and prayers were shared only 540 times in Parliament. This disparity may reflect the more secular nature of Canada, along with a concern by politicians not to mix religion and politics.
So how do Canadians feel about public prayer?
A survey released last week by Leger 360 about Quebec's plan to ban public prayer found that only 19% of Canadians outside of Quebec support a ban on public prayer, with 45% saying it should be permitted in certain circumstances. In Quebec, where the government is proposing that ban on public prayer, 43% said it should never be permitted, while 38% said it should be allowed under specific circumstances. Now, the Quebec government's proposal is a result of that province's desire to promote a more secular value, together with the discomfort some say they feel about Muslims praying in public. But if that's the case, it catches other prayers in its net too, such as when Catholics hold their annual Way of the Cross ceremonies on Good Friday, or if other Christians want to pray at public rallies. And it could violate freedoms that are guaranteed by the Quebec and the Canadian Charters of Rights and Freedoms. And it also raises the question of, what is prayer anyway? If someone stops and closes their eyes and meditates in public, is that prayer? How do you police thought? As for why Quebec is doing this, some have speculated it's because of how for decades the Catholic Church ruled that province in terms of morality. Maybe it's more of a backlash about that, they say, although Muslims in that province do feel unfairly targeted. As for other expressions of public prayer, Canadians do have questions, and that includes here in Manitoba, where Premier Wab Kinew convened what he called Prayer Summit of faith leaders and others last year to talk about replacing the Christian-style prayer that opens the sessions of the Manitoba legislature and have for decades. No decision has been announced by the provincial government, although it is said the Premier is leaning towards a moment of silence to start the session so everyone can feel included.
To the politicians themselves, you cited, how many times people stood in the States and hear and call for prayer. Are there pitfalls for politicians who do that, who call for prayer?
Yes, there could be, but if it's a genuine reflection of a person's character and their beliefs, then maybe not. Otherwise, however, it could look like a PR stunt, a cynical play to gain religious votes and support. One challenge for politicians is not to ask for prayer in a way that is limited to one form of belief, like calling on people to pray in the name of Jesus, for example. That would include some people and play well to that group, but it might exclude others, something no politician should want to do, and it cuts against the grain here in Canada of how we see ourselves as a welcoming and inclusive society. I can see it becoming a problem, too, if politicians always talk about prayer, because then it can become like background noise, as it seems to have become in the United States, where every politician seems to be required to issue thoughts and prayers after a tragedy. Do they really believe that, or do they think they just have to say that to keep voters on side? When thoughts and prayers are said too often, it can turn into meaningless blather, especially if nothing is done to rectify the situation that led to the tragedy in the first place, as we see in the angry reaction to many of the mass shootings in that country when people call for gun reform, not just for thoughts and prayers.
Here in Canada, have calls for prayers been controversial? What examples do we have of that?
The one thing that seems to be controversial every year in Canada is the annual National Prayer Breakfast in Ottawa. The purpose of that event, which has been held since 1964, is to unite political leaders in prayer as they, quote, walk together in the spirit of Jesus Christ, unquote. While the event is not sponsored by the government, it is held under the auspices of the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Commons on behalf of the Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast Group. Critics say that having something so obviously Christian, so closely tied to the government, blurs the line between church and state in a country that is officially secular and religiously diverse. In response, the organizers say all faiths are welcome. But since it usually features Bible readings, Christian prayers, and songs, I wonder how welcome those members of other faiths actually feel. Now, personally, I'm not against the idea of politicians getting together for prayer. I think our country can use all the prayers it can get. But I think it might also be better if it was an interfaith event, not a Christian one. A time when Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, and other religious leaders are invited to speak and pray together out of their own traditions for the health of this nation.
What do the studies say about the impact of prayer and its effect on people then?
Studies have found that people who pray regularly often report lower levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. For them, prayer provides a sense of hope, comfort, and meaning, especially during times of illness, grief, or crisis. And studies have also found that praying for others is linked with increased compassion, forgiveness, and empathy. Praying with others in need can also have the effect of strengthening social bonds and community ties. There have been studies that have found physical health benefits from prayer too, and I don't mean healing, although some believe prayer can do that as well. Rather, these studies have found that people who pray have better outcomes in recovery from surgery or illness, and that could be explained by how people who pray experience reduced stress, not the prayers themselves, although who knows? Science can't measure everything. But studies have also found a downside if prayer doesn't work. If you or the other person you're praying for doesn't get better if they're sick, or even if that other person dies, that can lead to disappointment and anger at God and even a loss of faith. And sometimes it leads to guilt if people feel they didn't pray hard enough or long enough. One person who has studied this is Kevin Ladd, who's a former pastor and psychologist, and he's author of the book, The Psychology of Prayer, A Scientific Approach. For him, a major function of prayer is the key role it plays in helping people cope with the problems they encounter in living. Prayer, he says, is significant for helping people deal with things like relationships, illness, and death. Pausing to pray also has a calming effect, generates a sense of peace, and reduces stress.
Now, you've offered some perspectives of your own, throughout the column today. But what is your own personal view of prayer, John?
Well, I'm with Pope Francis on that question. When asked about prayer for people who are starving, he said, quote, "You pray for the hungry, then you feed them. That's how prayer works," unquote. In other words, prayer is fine and it's good, but we shouldn't only send thoughts and prayers. We should also donate money, give blood, volunteer, make a casserole for a neighbor in crisis, or do anything else that might make a practical difference in the lives of those who are suffering.
Thank you very much for this week, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you.